It's easy to think that having more options would fuel your creativity, but the real breakthroughs in your art come from setting limits. When the choices feel endless, creativity can get paralyzed. Too many options drown out focus, while boundaries bring it back to life. Rules and constraints, instead of holding us back, can actually make us more productive and even protect us from burnout. They don't just shape our process, they shape our style. And if creativity thrives within limits, what does that say about freedom? Are boundaries the very thing that makes art possible? Are limits the rhythm that gives chaos meaning? In this video, we're going to explore why creativity doesn't die inside boundaries. It's born there. Our brains weren't built for endless choice, and that's why unlimited options can shut down our creativity. The more choices we have, the harder it is to choose anything at all. I've felt it so many times. Opening my DAW, scrolling through hundreds of sounds, and walking away with nothing. It's not just music. Painters freeze at the sight of a blank canvas. Writers stare at the empty page. When everything is possible, nothing gets done. This is the paradox of possibility. The wider it opens, the harder it becomes to take that first step. And it doesn't matter what kind of art you make, the feeling is always the same. Too many paths forward, and you end up taking none of them. For me, this paradox comes into focus with the Poly Play Plus. It's this little sample-based groove box that I love messing around with, especially with the built-in sound packs. With those, I can just dive in and start creating without thinking too much. But the real magic of it comes when you make your own custom sound packs. And that's where I get stuck. Every time I open my massive sample library to load sounds in, I get overwhelmed. There are just too many options. I scroll endlessly, second guessing what to pick, and most of the time, I give up before I even finish. So instead of using my own sounds, I'm stuck with using just the factory packs. They're great, but I know that I'm stuck in possibility instead of actually making something. That's the irony of creativity. It doesn't thrive in endless freedom. It thrives when we close the door on most options and fully step in to just one. Because when we have no limits, we stay scattered. We chase everything and finish nothing. But when we accept constraints, the noise falls away. The path forward becomes clear. Limits don't just narrow our choices. They focus our energy. They give our ideas a direction, and they give our art a shape. Limits don't silence creativity. They give it something to say. But it's not just that limits give creativity a voice. They also give it focus. When we cut off endless possibilities, what's left starts to stand out more clearly. Ideas stop competing with each other, and instead begin to line up, one after the other. Focus comes from narrowing down, from committing to a path, and letting that path guide the next step. Without boundaries, our creativity scatters in every direction. With them, it gathers its strength. You see this in every art form. Painters limit their palette to just a few colors, and new harmonies appear on the canvas. Writers place themselves inside a form, a sonnet, a haiku, and the words begin to arrange themselves with surprising clarity. Musicians do the same when they stay in one key or one rhythm. The restriction doesn't block creativity, it sharpens it. The work doesn't expand because of endless choice. It expands because the boundaries point the way forward. In my own workflow, I see this all the time. Here, I'm using the dulcitone library from Frozen Plain, paired with Ableton's generative sequencer. If I let the sequencer fire off every possible note, it just sounds like chaos. But the moment I narrow the choices to one scale, suddenly it starts to feel musical. Then I take it further, just one octave, and only quarter notes, in a simple 2-bar loop. Now, instead of random noise, I have the beginnings of a melody I can actually build from. Every boundary makes the result clear. By cutting off possibilities, I'm uncovering something that I can use. What started as noise becomes music the moment we start drawing lines around it. One of the first full tracks I ever recorded came together in my parents' living room when they were away on vacation. At that point, I'd just come out of the hospital after a long stay, still raw from living on the streets, still refusing to take the meds that weren't really helping me anyway. All I had was an amp, a microphone, and my guitar. I recorded a simple 2-note loop and let it run. For hours, I improvised on top of it, switching between acoustic and electric guitar, sometimes singing, sometimes just saying whatever came to mind. When I listened back, it felt like my head at the time, tangled of voices and sounds, circling the same ideas without clarity or direction. So I stepped away from it. A few days later, I came back and started carving. I treated the recordings like a block of stone. Long hours of editing, cutting, shaping with nothing more than volume or panning, chiseling away at the noise until the strongest fragments remained. I became obsessive with it, barely eating or sleeping. I was convinced that I was unearthing something hidden underneath. What came out wasn't perfect. It was raw, messy, and a little manic, but it was honest. And what made it magical was limiting myself to those few tools. Just the one microphone, my guitar, shaping everything with volume and panning. From that narrow palette, I found direction. If you want to hear it, it's the opening track of my most recent album, Through the Stillness, Through the Dark. Whether it was a sequencer confined to a single rhythm or a song shaped by just a few elements, the lesson was the same. Limits don't bury creativity, they refine it. They cut through the noise, strip away the distraction, and leave behind something clear and true. What started as chaos becomes music, not in spite of the boundaries, but because of them. Limits don't just focus our creativity, they're what get us across the finish line. Without them, projects drift. I lost count of how many times I've kept tweaking, adding layers, chasing perfection, until the whole thing just collapses under its own weight. Freedom can feel like progress, but without boundaries, there's no reason to stop, no line to cross, no way to know that the work is done. When limits are in place, it's different. They force decisions. And once you make a decision, it points you towards the next one. Step by step, the project moves forward. Boundaries don't just narrow our choices, they create momentum. And that momentum is what makes us productive. Limits are the difference between ideas that fade away and work that gets finished. I learned the cost of having no limits on a project I had with a former collaborator. We kept redoing the guitars, redoing the drums, tweaking layers, little details that never seemed to get us closer to the end. A few weeks turned into months, and by the time a year had passed, we still didn't have a finished EP. Eventually, he got so fed up with all the endless tweaking that he pulled all his contributions, and I was left with nothing to show for over 12 months of work. Without boundaries, the whole project collapsed under its own weight. That experience taught me the value of setting limits. Now when I work with clients, I charge by the hour. It might sound like just a simple business decision, but it creates a boundary that changes everything. My clients come prepared because they know the clock is running. We focus on the essentials, make clear decisions, and by the end of the session, we've actually finished something. The time limit doesn't restrict the work, it gives it shape and momentum. And the more I've worked this way, the clearer it's become. Limits don't kill creativity, they protect it. They stop us from chasing endless possibilities and force us to commit. They turn sessions into songs and ideas into finished projects. Without them, it's too easy to just drift forever. With them, we cross the finish line over and over again. And that is what makes us productive. Getting to the finish line is important, but it's just as important how we feel when we actually get there. Because if every project leaves us drained and exhausted, eventually we stop showing up altogether. That's the quiet danger of creating without limits. It doesn't just stall the work, it burns us out. That same project with my collaborator didn't just collapse because we lacked boundaries. It left us both completely drained. After nearly a year of redoing guitars, redoing drums, and tweaking little details, the energy was gone. We weren't excited anymore. We weren't chasing ideas. We were just grinding, hoping that maybe the next revision would make things click. And when he finally pulled his contributions, it wasn't just frustration, it was burnout. Neither of us wanted to touch the project again. That's what happens when there are no boundaries. Every project feels bottomless. Every decision feels like it could be undone. And instead of finishing, you run yourself into the ground. Limits protect us from that. A time cap forces you to walk away before you've drained all your energy. Restricting your tool selection stops you from drowning in options. Even something as simple as defining your process, deciding this take is the one, this mix is final, preserves your relationship with the work. Limits aren't cages, they're safeguards. They keep us from burning out on the very thing we love. And that's the deeper reason that limits matter. They don't just help us finish once. They make it possible to return again tomorrow, and the next day, and the next. Without them, creativity becomes exhausting. With them, it becomes sustainable. And sometimes the limits we keep returning to don't just keep us from burning out. They start to define us. The boundaries that we embrace again and again become a part of our voice as artists. They shape not just what we make, but who we are when we make it. Limits don't just keep us from burning out, they start to define us. The tools we return to, the boundaries we embrace, even the ceilings of our own abilities, all of it becomes our voice. Our identity as artists isn't found in chasing every possibility. It's revealed in the limits that we accept. You can see this in artists everywhere. Billie Eilish and Phineas recorded their first songs in a bedroom, using little more than a laptop and a mic. Those limitations created an intimacy, close, whispered vocals, and minimal arrangements. That became her signature sound. Sufjan Stevens built his recordings out of banjos, odd orchestrations, and home-recorded textures that felt fragile and human. And entire genres have been born this way. Black metal's raw, lo-fi aesthetic wasn't a stylistic decision at first. It came from recording on cheap tape machines in bedrooms and basements. What started as a limitation became a defining sound of the movement. The sound of a boundary became the sound of a generation. And the same is true for me. One part of my style comes from a single pedal, the hologram microcosm. I keep returning to it. I set the limit of using just a single instrument and then using the pedal to create all the surrounding layers. textures, rhythms, atmospheres, carving them into something beautiful. I even made an entire EP that way. It's called I Am Made of Light, I Am Made of Stars. That boundary didn't shrink my sound. It gave me a world to work inside. Another defining limit is my guitar playing. I'm not a technical guitarist. I can't do anything too complicated. But that pushed me into using alternate tunings. And those tunings have been a liberation for me. Every time I drop my guitar into a new shape, I discover chords and riffs that wouldn't have existed otherwise. It's not a flaw, it's my fingerprint. Even the way I record has been shaped by limits. Sometimes I'll use the same amp for bass and guitar. It can give them a shared tone that ties everything together. Other times I'll build a whole song out of a single sample, turning it into pads, leads, percussion. What could feel like scarcity becomes identity. Limits shape the songs we make, and the songs shape us in return. Over time, those boundaries stop feeling like obstacles and start feeling like signatures. They become the choices we're known for, the sounds that people recognize as ours. And the more we return to them, the more they carve out not just our work, but who we are as artists. The boundaries become the identity. Limits don't just shape our style, they reveal something deeper about creativity itself. Because creativity doesn't happen in the absence of boundaries, it happens through them. Every artist, no matter the medium, works within limits. Time is always running, paint dries, words end, notes decay. Even our lives are bounded. We only get so many years to make something of them. The canvas needs edges. The songs need silence. The story needs an ending. Without those frames, there's no art at all. Philosophers have wrestled with this for centuries. Kant believed that genius without form is meaningless. Inspiration needs structure to become art. Nietzsche wrote about the tension between chaos and order, saying that creation requires both. Heidegger described creativity as bringing forth within the limits of being and time. In other words, art emerges because we are bounded, not in spite of it. And psychology echoes the same truth. Studies show that when we face moderate constraints, our creativity actually increases. Too much freedom and we get paralyzed. Too much restriction and we get stuck. But in the middle, where the options are narrowed just enough, we thrive. Flow theory describes the same balance. We find flow when our challenge matches our skill. If it's too easy, we get bored. If it's too hard, we get anxious. It's the right boundaries that carry us into that state where we lose track of time. Even Teresa Amabiel's studies on creativity show that while rigid external rules can stifle us, chosen or self-imposed limits actually enhance our creative focus. I've lived this truth myself. For years, I thought I was living the life of a musician by surrounding myself with other players at parties. There were always instruments around, and sometimes people would jam. But when I look back now, I realized that I wasn't really there for the music. I was caught up chasing the next high, and the nights slipped away from me. Instead of creating beautiful moments with other musicians, I stayed close to the table, distracted, waiting for more. The turning point came when I was evicted from the house I was staying at. Everyone there I lived with had their own struggles. And when the landlord wanted to move their family into the house, we were all forced out. Suddenly I had to start over. I moved into a small apartment with my girlfriend, and for the first time, I asked myself what would actually make me feel whole. The answer wasn't another night out on the town with my friends. It was music. Sobriety became the limit that unlocked everything else. I started building a home studio. I invited musicians in to record and live stream shows. I began focusing on my own songs instead of recovering from hangovers or losing time to distractions. At first it was hard, but once I committed, once I was medicated, once I was stable, something shifted. I started making music nearly every day, and since then I've written hundreds of songs. Now when I spend time with other musicians, it isn't about escaping. It's about making something real together. My relationships now are deeper and built on respect and admiration, and my creativity isn't drained anymore. It's fueled by consistency and showing up. That's the greatest gift that sobriety gave me. It might look like a limit from the outside, but it's the boundary that gave me my freedom. It's the boundary that gave me back my life. And maybe that's the deepest truth about creativity itself. Limits aren't just a part of the process. They are the process. They're the frame that makes the painting visible, the silence that makes the music resonate, the boundary that makes life meaningful. Without them, nothing takes shape. With them, everything does. At the start of this video, I asked a simple question. What do limits really mean for our creativity? Do they hold us back, or do they unlock something deeper? Are they the rhythm that gives chaos meaning, the frame that makes the picture visible? Over the past 20 or so minutes, we've traced the ways limits shape our art and our lives. We've seen how drowning in possibility can paralyze us, and how closing the door on most options lets us finally take a step forward. We've seen how boundaries sharpen our focus, giving ideas a direction instead of scattering them everywhere. We've seen how they push us to get across the finish line, transforming endless drafts into finished songs, and how they protect us from burnout, keeping the process sustainable so we can return again tomorrow. We've seen how limits carve out our voice as artists, how the tools that we keep returning to, the boundaries we choose, even the ceilings of our abilities become our style. They're not flaws to overcome. They're fingerprints, the marks of who we are. And finally, we've seen that limits aren't just a part of creativity. They are the medium of creativity itself. Every artist, no matter the form, creates inside boundaries. Time, materials, mortality. Philosophers have pointed this out for centuries. That genius needs form, that chaos needs order, that creation only happens within the frame of existence. Psychology confirms it too. Constraints drive problem solving. Flow emerges when boundaries are set, and chosen limits enhance focus instead of stifling it. I've lived this in my own life, from the chaos of those early recordings with just my little Focusrite and a singular microphone, to the discipline of finishing client work within an hourly limit, to the deeper limit of sobriety that gave me my life back. Again and again, boundaries didn't close me in. They opened me up. They didn't kill my creativity. They gave it shape. They gave it meaning. And if you zoom out even further, limits aren't just a part of art or even human life. The whole universe is a vast network of processes, unfolding moment by moment. And it's at the edges of those processes, at their limits, that our experience of reality is created. Without limits, there is no distinction, no form, no event. In this sense, limits aren't just where creativity happens. Limits are creation itself. So what do limits really mean for creativity? They're not the bars of a cage. They're the strings of an instrument. They're the silence between notes. They're the frame around the canvas. Limits don't stand against creativity. They make it possible. Every act of creation is an act of choosing. Every choice is a limit. And it's inside those limits that possibility becomes presence, that chaos becomes music, that art and life become real. If you like this video, hit the like button. If you'd like to see more like this, or you'd like to see my recording process, hit the subscribe button. Hit the bell to get notified when I drop a new video. Thank you so much for joining me.